Hello and welcome to episode 240. Wow, of Boomer Banter. Very excited about that. And I have a question. Have you ever wondered what it would be like to walk the same streets your ancestors once did? To stand in the village your great grandmother left behind? Or maybe meet a cousin that you didn't even know existed? Well, this week on Boomer Banter, we're digging into a different kind of journey, ancestry travel, and how it can give us a deeper sense of who we are and possibly even where we're going. I'm joined today by Jim Lenahan, AARP's executive editor in the travel section, to explore how older adults are turning heritage trips into powerful personal experiences. We'll talk about why this kind of travel is trending, how to plan your own roots seeking adventure, and we'll hear some moving stories from people who've made the journey. Whether you've already traced your family tree or you're just beginning to wonder where your people came from, this conversation might just inspire your next great adventure and help you find a deeper sense of purpose along the way. Because for many of us, especially in this stage of life, purpose isn't something we chase. It's something that we uncover. And sometimes it starts by looking backwards. Hi, my name is Wendy Green, and I am your host for Boomer Banter, where we have real talk about aging well. And just a quick reminder that if you want to stay connected with us, if you don't want to miss any of the great guests that we have, the inspirational things that we talk about in the newsletter, go ahead and subscribe right now. Go to heyboomer.biz and click on Age Well with Us. I'd love to be connected with you. In fact, I got an email today from somebody who had just connected, and it was so great to hear from someone who really appreciates what's going on. So go ahead and join the community. All right, let me bring Jim on and introduce him to you all. Hi, Jim.
Hi, Wendy. How are you?
I am great. How are you?
Good, and congratulations. So 10 more episodes, you'll be at 250.
I know. Can you
That's so
believe
exciting.
it? It's amazing.
That's so exciting.
It is very exciting. Thank you. And because, that's something you do too. So
That's right. That's right.
outside of AARP, we're not talking about
Yeah,
that today, though.
that's okay.
Yeah, so I want to talk about this ancestry travel. I know this is something that you have worked on before, and I'm wondering what are some of the trends that you're seeing around what we're calling ancestry travel?
Yeah, so I think a lot of older people and retirees in particular, we can get that maybe a little later, but I think a lot of older people just in general start to get interested in ancestry in general. That just, sort of as you get older, you start to think about your own legacy, right? That
Hmm.
you're going to leave behind. And then that makes you think about what was left or not left to you from say your parents or grandparents or what have you. How much do you know about them or you don't know about them? And so a lot of older people just in general start to get interested in their own ancestry. Um, and then that leads to, for a lot of people wanting to travel and sort of experience that. And this has been a real trend over the last few years. I mean, the interest, you might remember, there was sort of a boom of interest in it back in like the late 70s with the show Roots.
Oh, right.
Right.
Yes.
The
Hmm.
miniseries Roots. That got, which is all about somebody tracing his ancestry and traveling to that place. And there was, sort of a boom of interest in it then. And then maybe it died down for a while and everything. But with the internet, it's become more popular again. And you even have services like ancestry.com that will really help you in sort of like finding those, records that can be helpful in learning about your family history. Um, it's sort of tools and help in that way. So that's become a big driver of this. And it's just easier, to search for public records if things have been, in some cases have been digitized and you can find them easier now than having to travel to, some office of records somewhere, some, small town library, those kinds of things, right? A lot of that stuff is more available now. So that just kind of made things a little bit easier, or somewhat easier. And then so much so that, and I should also mention too that um, there's been some recent TV shows that have boosted interest in learning about ancestry and genealogy. So PBS has a show called Finding Your Roots, where they, have celebrities on and they go through that exercise. They've done a whole bunch of research and sort of help.
I know it's nice
All
when you
that.
have that kind of help,
Right,
right?
exactly. There was another one that was called "Who Do You Think You Are," and that was on for like 10 years or something like that on NBC and TLC. No, the same kind of thing. And then I also mentioned too, you've had, again, because of internet and technology and things like that, you've had the rise of DNA tests that people are able to take. And that, is a big factor in sort of like, how you put together your family tree. You learn more about,
Mhm.
your own ethnicity and so on that way. And so my dog is trying to get in here. So, so anyway, so all of those factors combined have led to this interest now in ancestry travel. And so what you have there is, I looked up some numbers here. It's expected to reach 15, that market, ancestry travel market, is expected to reach $15.8 billion of
Wow.
US travelers by 2033. So, I don't know about you. I never know what these numbers really mean,
It's
but
a big number.
it's a big number. It sounds impressive, right? I mean, that's like triple apparently what it was just now in 2023. So they're expecting a lot more interest in that kind of travel. And there's a lot of reasons for that. And then because of that, a lot of tour groups now specialize in ancestry travel. So if this is something you want to do, you can reach out to professionals, kind of like on the TV show, right? But there are professionals who will help you with this. You tell them your circumstance, you tell them what kind of research you've done. They may even do some more research for you, or help you, point you in the right direction where you can do that research, and then help you plan the trip that will be most beneficial for you, where you're going to get those results. You're going to be able to then look at, they'll plan it out where you can look at records in those places. Say you're going to go to
Yeah.
Italy or Ireland or what have you, right?
Yeah, so
Where
we'll
can you
talk.
find those? Yeah.
We'll definitely talk more about that as we go on. But I think it makes sense as you're describing how it's starting to pick up, looking into 2032. I think you said, because it's the boomer
Right.
generation, right? We now have the curiosity. We want to know about our family trees, and many of us have the income to do
Mhm.
this kind of travel. And AARP is giving us all kinds of wonderful other information about travel and how to do it and make it safe and where to go and things like that. So I think there's a lot of factors feeding into this. And you started to mention the retirees as opposed to just older adults. Are you
Right.
seeing one group more than other?
For sure. I mean, I think, like I said, anyone, as you sort of get older and your kids start to get, become grown adults and all that kind of stuff, like I said, there just kind of is an interest in that legacy factor. But retirees in particular, as you mentioned, they may have the, the money to be able to travel, because they've saved up, when they have that nest egg. But also, the real factor, I think, is the time. So
Mm-hmm.
if you're going to do the kind of research that will make an ancestry trip really pay off, that really does take quite a bit of time. You start to go, you start to pull at string, right? And the things lead you, to more research, and you go down these, quote unquote rabbit holes, right? And
Right.
it does take a lot of time to do it, but I think that people in retirement find that enjoyable. It's not a chore. It's another sense of purpose, right? That you
It
have,
is
right? Exactly.
absolutely
Right.
another sense of
And so
purpose.
instead of, watching, reruns of, Cheers again, which is a great show, but, you can spend your time doing research on your family and preparing for that trip.
And because then as a purpose thing, it's not just for me, I'm thinking if I'm doing this kind of research, it's for my family, for my kids, like I'm going to leave this legacy for them to know more about their history and their family too. So that really does fill a sense of purpose for the person that's doing that kind of research.
Completely. Yes. I mean, we do find when we interview people about this topic that they get so much out of it just personally themselves, right? Because not only is it just a sense of like, your family better, but you kind of feel like you know yourself better
Mm.
if you understand kind of like where you came from and what others ahead of you dealt with or had to endure or something, to make this life for you, right? That gives you
Hmm.
some sense of who you are and your place in this world, right? But then again, all of that is
Interesting.
stuff you can pass on to your kids and your grandkids and future
Tell me
generations.
more
Yeah.
about that. You have some particular stories of people that have found out more about themselves or felt that they learned more about themselves because of what they now uncovered?
Well, I think there's some of that. There's one story we did, you know, this was some time ago, but we had one story we had where a writer, a journalist, who he knew that his family was from Norway, and so he made contact with a cousin from there, or sort of a distant cousin. When we say cousin, it can be,
3 or 4
the
times
tree,
removed.
right? Exactly, the tree can get pretty wide here. But he had made contact with a cousin, been able to travel to Norway and more than once and visit this cousin, and basically their great grandfathers were brothers, so that's how they
Okay.
were related, right?
Mhm.
But again, in this case, they, basically what had happened was those two brothers had split. One stayed in Norway, the other one moved to America for opportunities at that time, decades ago. And so you do get a sense of yourself in what he said was, it could have been the opposite. Like he could have,
Right.
if it had been the reverse, the brothers had each chosen the opposite path, right? He
Yeah.
would have grown up in Norway instead of the United States, right? So
Mm,
yes, it gives you
yeah.
the sense of like why you are where you are is because
Yeah.
of the decisions that others have made before you, right?
And then you meet this cousin who you probably didn't even know he existed at first until
Right.
yeah, that's really cool. So so through these kinds of trips, are family reunions happening that you have heard about?
Well, that's actually a pretty amazing thing. We did a feature story in AARP, the magazine, last year specifically on Ancestry travel, and we interviewed a number of people who had gone through that experience. And there was one woman. There were a couple stories that were really interesting. One was a woman who lives in Indiana, and she traveled to Germany. And let me just grab my notes here. So she traveled to Germany, and she she found a number of relatives there. So again, one thing I've learned from these various stories is it helps if you can locate a cousin. There's always like a cousin who's like sort of at the root of this, right? And again, it doesn't have to be a first cousin; it can be farther on. But if you do enough research to find that one person
Mm.
who can really help you out, and a lot in many of these cases, they get very excited about it as
Oh, I
well, right?
bet. Yeah.
So then so I mentioned this woman from Indiana. She goes to Germany. She had some communications with this distant cousin. Um, the person, throws a party. They have a gathering, and then there's all these other distant relatives who get invited, right? So that was one case. And what was interesting in her case was that she had done so much research. She says she spent 40 years researching her family tree.
Oh my
Okay.
gosh.
Now,
Right, right,
obviously it
right,
was a
right, not
hobby, right?
mm,
Right.
right.
But she had done so much research that she informed them when she went to Germany. She informed her family members of things that they didn't even know about their
Oh,
family.
that's cool.
And in
Yeah.
fact, connected people who didn't even know they were distantly related with the
Really?
town
That
in
still
Germany,
lived in
right? Yes,
Germany.
yes.
Oh my
And she was like,
gosh.
"Did you know that you're related to this person by this part of the," again, sort of distantly, but They didn't
Yeah.
even know that, right? So there was that. There was another man we interviewed um, from Virginia who traveled to Northern Ireland. Yep, and he basically just wanted to see like the church where I believe it was his grandmother was married and things like that. You know, kind of this stuff you might want to do. You've done enough research about that you know those key details of your ancestors'
Hmm.
lives. And he just wanted to do that kind of thing. But again, he had made a contact with a cousin. Um, he and his family traveled there, and the suddenly they're part of this family gathering. They met 30 family members in Ireland, right? You
Really?
know, who they had no contact with before. They had this big party, 30 people who
Huh.
they didn't know before. So yes, you know, again, if you can make the right, you know, do the right research and make the right contact, that can really be a big difference in terms of how
Find
things
that
work out.
cousin.
Yeah,
Find that
exactly.
cousin. And do you know if these people have like maintained contact with some of the people they meet in these reunion kind of things?
Oh, I'm sure they have. I'm sure
Yeah.
they have. It's really
Yeah.
interesting. You know, there was another man um, from Oregon who traveled to Japan,
Hmm.
and he didn't expect to meet any family members because his grandparents had immigrated from Japan to Hawaii
Okay.
in 1906 or something like that. So we were
Oh,
talking, you know,
yeah.
120 years ago,
Yeah.
and he went there just basically again, kind of like the Northern Ireland story, kind of just to see where they lived. You know, what was the town? What is this town, right? And that can be in and of itself very you know very informative to people just to see the place.
Sure.
But he did bring along some photos that he
Hmm.
had, some old photos, and and he also had a tour guide. This is another thing you can find now these days is you can get a genealogical tour guide who can help you with this stuff. So
Really?
he had that, and because of that, they were able to sort of go around and knock on some doors to see if they
Huh.
could get some more information. You know, it's the kind of thing you may feel weird about doing just on your
Especially if
own.
there's a language issue or
Right.
yeah.
Totally, totally. But if you have somebody local who's like, "Hey, let's go check this out,"
Yeah.
and that's what they did. And eventually, it took a while, you know, and he didn't expect to find again any family members there, but it took a while, and eventually they found somebody who looked at the photo and said, "Oh, I think I know someone who can help you," and sent them to another place. And it turns out that they did actually connect with distant family members. And the woman, one of the one of the women they met, she and her brother, one of the women recognized herself, and her name was written on the back of the photo, so that was a key. But she was like a young child, like a toddler, or something like that in the photo, and she was like, "That's me."
Oh, you're kidding. Oh,
And from
that gives you
that,
chills.
right,
Wow.
from that, they had a great, you know, time together. Again, in this case, they were asking more and more questions about America. You know, they want to know that part of the story because these people left and maybe they lost touch with what happened, you know,
Sure.
after that,
Yeah.
right? So they were asking all these questions and all that. But yeah, I know in that case, you know, now they have a lifetime bond with these people who was really just sort of a chance encounter.
That's amazing. That's amazing. So not only do you need a cousin, you need some pictures.
Well,
So
pictures are
hopefully
really
pictures would
important, and
help.
people who run these tour groups, things like that, they advise that if you have any old family photos, you know, from as far back as you can find, bring those along because you never know
Yeah.
when that can be helpful.
Yeah. So these are great stories, but then I know there are people that will go on these trips and they hopefully will have an experience like that, but they end up not finding family. They just find locations, which is, I shouldn't say just, because that also is very meaningful. But I know in some of your writings, you have encouraged people mm, to moderate their expectations, or
Right.
how would you say that?
We do say that we do tell people that they need to keep their expectations realistic, right?
Mm,
So again, you may not be able to connect with family members when you go on an ancestry trip, but again, you may just find that seeing these places can really give you a great sense of accomplishment from it,
Mm.
right? So,
Mhm.
again, it all depends on the research you've been able to do, and to see that will determine sort of how specific it can get. So, like I said, if you know my grandparents or great grandparents or whatever it may be were married in such a church, and churches are the kind of thing that tend to last a long time, especially in Europe, where
Right.
they
They like
they
historic
preserve
buildings.
these buildings, right? um so you can, you may be able to actually see that, and then you get the sense of, like, you're walking in footsteps. So all of that can be, um can give a feeling of accomplishment to people. But um and so I don't know that they feel necessarily disappointed by not meeting family members, as long as they feel that they, got some sense of, again, it's that sort of walking in the footsteps kind of thing. This is where
Right.
my ancestors were, and this is what they experienced. And one thing we also advise people is, um, when you do research, don't just research your family, but research that place, because the
Mm.
more you know about that
That's a
place
good
you're
idea.
visiting, and its
Mhm.
history and its culture, and specifically, as best you can, like what it was like at the time when your ancestors lived there, the
Yeah.
better sense of place you'll have when you're there, and a better sense of, like, what it was like for them. Then, and sometimes it can even be fiction. Like sometimes
Yeah.
there's great historical fiction that was about
There
that
are.
place, that'll
Mhm.
give you just a great sense of place, very vivid descriptions of these places and what they were like back then. So, you know, that's another thing you can do as well. But I want to mention, another story that we had in the magazine was a woman who traveled to Sierra Leone. So when you think about the African American experience in this country,
Mm.
there just aren't a lot of records,
Right.
ancestral records and things like that. So I don't think she had any expectation that she was going to find family members, and because it's very difficult to trace.
But
Again,
the
so
DNA had indicated Sierra Leone.
that's exactly it. That's exactly it. So
Mm.
with that understanding by itself, she traveled to Sierra Leone, and was able to at least trace back to, uh, the people where
Right.
her ancestors, were part of, and made such great connections there with those people that she was named a chieftain.
Really?
Yes, and
Wow.
now she travels back annually, and
Huh.
has made such connections with these people in Sierra Leone, that this group of people, that she is able to, make it feel like family.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So
Yeah. There is something about that. I remember as a young person going to Israel with my family. And, they, of course, they're not from Israel. They immigrated to Israel during the Second World War.
right,
But there's a sense of, like, that's part of me. That's part of my history and my family. They survived and they went there. And, so it's that kind of thing that I think a lot of Americans, we don't have that here. And we're almost all immigrants, right?
that's right.
And so when you go back to a place that your family came from, there is something very moving about that. So what would you say would be like step one if someone decides they want to do an ancestry trip? What would you say would be one of the first things they should do?
Right. So a lot of times, people will say, and we've said this already here in this conversation, is do research. But what does that mean exactly?
What
Right.
does that mean,
It
Jim?
right, right. So you really should do your best to create a family tree. So, I mean, that can be as simple as starting by just talking to, your family who you interact with on a regular basis anyway.
Mhm.
Um, and then, ask the right questions and start to put that family tree together. And then once you sort of, like, reach the end of what you can get from, just, your close family or your
Living
extended
relatives.
living
Mhm.
relatives, right?
Yep.
Once you reach that dead end, that's where then you can go to places like ancestry.com, or search for various public records. If you know somebody was from a certain place, there's, sorry, you can search through public records in, with local governments, local libraries, things like that. Sometimes it's a matter of, again, if records were digitized, you can look at them online. If they weren't necessarily, sometimes it might take some phone calls, find out, where do these records exist, birth certificates on file in some
Mhm.
courthouse somewhere, or, what
Right.
have you.
Ellis
Um,
Island probably has
right,
some,
right.
right?
So you can make, within the United States, you can start to think like, well, is it worth making a trip here, there, wherever to kind of create this family tree to the best of my ability? So there's that. Like I mentioned, interview relatives. That's the first source that makes the most sense. We also recommend, we say sift through closets, right? So a lot of times there's personal information, records, that people kept, important records, birth certificates, marriage certificates, family
Hmm.
photos, things like that, that might be in some box that you didn't realize, right? So you got to,
Yeah.
look for those boxes of old stuff, closets, basements, attics. Ask relatives if it's okay. Maybe they have boxes of stuff that they haven't had time to go through. Can you look through it and organize it for them, right? And maybe then you'll find some great information there. So that's another thing you should do. The genetic tests that I mentioned can, at least give you information on uh, things like ethnicity and so on, that can give you some sense of your roots that maybe you didn't know. In fact, I'll just a quick aside here. Another woman who we wrote about in an upcoming issue of AARP, the magazine. This will be
Ooh,
in the
we're getting a
yeah,
sneak
yeah.
peek.
This will be in the August September issue.
Okay.
This woman knew she was of Mexican descent. She lives in Texas. She took a DNA test. I don't even know what prompted this. I can't remember, but with urging of the family, something like that. Like, everybody's taking these DNA tests. You
Right.
should do that,
Right.
right? Or friends or what have you. She took one and she found out that she's 70% Spanish. Okay. And so then she wanted to specifically take a trip, and she did this in retirement. This was like her big post-retirement trip. Um, she and her sister went to Spain, to this specific towns that they could figure out that the family was from, Granada and Seville.
Ooh, okay.
And what they really found was, just in terms of like physical characteristics,
Yeah.
the women looked like them in a way that they had never experienced
Huh.
before, even in the
Yeah.
US or even in Mexico. And going to Mexico, they went to these towns, just, they just had the similar sort of look to them physically. And
Yeah.
so they found that just to be very, um, very heartening in some way, to get that
Absolutely.
sense, that this was really the place where they were from. So yeah.
Oh, I can't wait to see that
So
article. That's cool.
yeah, so DNA tests can really help in some way.
Mhm.
Um, as a so all of that, as much research as you can do ahead of time, will really help. And then I mentioned, if you want to use a tour company to
Yeah, tell
sort of,
me more about that, how
yeah.
these tour companies work.
So there's a number of those, and you can find them. You can Google for genealogical travel or ancestry travel, and you could find a number of these. And there are some that are even very specific. Like I mentioned, the woman who went to Sierra Leone, she used a company called African Ancestry. Like, they can get that
Okay.
specific, right? But there's a number of those, and basically you give them the information that you have. And it can be a little or it can be a lot. I don't know that there's an expectation that you have to do or have done all of this research. They can help with that. But if you give them whatever you have, they can really uh, help you sort of create that trip. So these are the places that you should visit. They can, in some cases, set you up, as mentioned, with a genealogical tour guide who can
Hmm.
help you in that place. They can help you, not only, I mean, like any kind of travel agency, tour company, they can help you with the accommodations and book all of that as well.
Well,
But
sure.
they can
Yeah.
really, kind of help you with an itinerary, and you should
Hmm.
visit this place and you should visit this place and you should go here. And, you know, like I mentioned, some cases here, somebody can help you with that and help you with the language and, kind of help ask the right questions and make those inroads into the.
And so once you're on the ground, does the tour guide they assign to you help you with further research, or do you?
They certainly can. So
Yeah.
because in some cases you want to do some research while you're there, because again, a lot of those records and things that you might be looking for only exist in, say, Dublin or wherever you might be going, right?
Right,
Yeah.
right. Or
So
you knock on doors and you find somebody who's in the picture.
that's right.
Yeah.
Exactly. So we tell people that, when you go to the place, the things you should really, the information you should really have, if you're going to be doing additional research once you get to that destination, is names. So have as many names as possible of your family
Mm,
who you think would have lived there, or maybe are children of people who would have lived there, something like that. So
mhm.
make sure you have all the names written down, you have all that with you, as many dates as possible. So when did people live here, that sort of thing. Again, the places, obviously, as much as you can, and then the relationships. So if you have names, dates, places, and relationships, all the stuff written down when you go there, that can make a big difference when you go and do further research and talk to people, whether they're officials or hopefully, people who knew your family or friends, or family, other family members, that sort of thing. And then the photos, yes, of course, really big
Yeah,
thing. You never know when somebody looks at it, and you can even just put all that stuff on your phone, and you don't have to take the physical photos with you. But you never know. You swipe through and somebody might say, "Hey, that was my uncle," or
that's
"That was my
right.
grandfather," right? You
That's
never know.
right.
Yep.
That's right. So we talked about this before, Jim. A lot of times when people retire and they travel right away, it seems to be, in my experience, that they're avoiding the question of, what's next? Now, am I going to fill my time? And they're
Hmm.
just making a tangible break from work life to retirement life. Something that you called retirement moon, kind of like a honeymoon. But they come back and they're right back into real life. So ancestry travel could be part of this retirement moon, and it can help the traveler reconnect with their heritage and their identity. So, how have you heard people use this retirement moon thing that you talk
Right.
about to energize themselves? And do you think that if they were looking at ancestry travel, it would be even more energizing?
Yeah, that's good. That's a good question. The retirement moons is something we're writing specifically about in that August-September issue of
Oh, okay.
AARP, the magazine. And we have several stories of people who've taken these types of trips. One of them, the woman I mentioned who went to Spain. So ancestry travel can be part of that. We have
Mm-hmm.
there's another ancestry travel story of sorts in there, with a woman who went to Italy as part of her first big retirement trip. Um, Not so much to trace her ancestry, but to specifically see where her grandfather fought. I believe it was her grandfather.
Oh,
Might have been her father. Actually, I think it was her father. Um, Father fought in World War II.
which is a
Yeah.
heritage
Yes.
thing.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that was her. She just wanted to get that one aspect of his life.
Mhm.
He was an American, but because he fought in Italy in World War II, she wanted to see that place,
Sure.
and she
Yeah.
did. And she was again able to connect with people there who showed her, um, this was the American headquarters. This like building that's now a house or whatever was where the American troops were
Hmm.
headquartered in this town. So she was, by entering that building, right
Yep.
now, you're like,
Yep.
again, it's the footsteps thing. I'm walking in the footsteps of
Sure.
this person.
Yeah.
So anyway, but getting back to your question about retirement moons in general. So the retirement moon, if for people who haven't heard that term before, I mean, it's kind of self-explanatory in the sense of it's built off of the idea of the honeymoon, right? So a honeymoon is something that, obviously when you first get married and you've planned this big trip, and it's sort of just, mark this new phase of life, right?
Uh-huh.
um, it's kind of the same thing with the retirement moon, which is that these tend to be the first big trip that people take when they retire, which is not necessarily a new thing. People have been doing that for a long time. What is the question you always get asked when you're approaching retirement? Are you going to travel?
Right,
Right. So
right.
that's probably the big thing. So a lot of people do. That's like one of the first things they do, take a big trip. And so the travel industry has now started to call this retirement moon, and sort of like caters to that for people who are making those kind of plans. And they can be anything. So we're talking now, kind of about ancestry travel, and that's one thing that people might do. But it can be, taking that road trip that you always wanted to take across the United States. It can be just, traveling to some exotic land that you have always wanted to go to. It can be any
Yeah,
number of
yeah,
things, right?
yeah. It's
Um,
kind of a bucket list trip, huh?
right. And I always think that travel generally kind of falls into one of two categories, right? Which is either the relaxing vacation where you just don't want to do anything, right?
Right.
Or the active vacation where you want to go and be on the move and see a lot of things and learn about that place, right? And so
Mhm.
um these retirement moons tend to be more on the sort of active side, or at least,
Mhm.
because it's a sense of like, I really want to experience something, do something that I haven't done before.
Right.
But that's not to
Yeah,
discount the people who just want to go and be on the beach, and just relax. You've earned that. So that's okay too.
for sure.
Yeah. So, so yes, we are seeing that. Oh, so I guess getting back to your question, afterward,
Energizing, right,
I
and
think, yeah, I think that when we talk about things like ancestry travel is one example of that sort of active, purposeful retirement moon, right?
mhm,
Um,
mhm.
it does have a lasting impact. And, as I mentioned, with all these people, they've made connections that will continue on, right? And so now whether they go back to that place, whether they communicate with these people, you know, family members, or in the Sierra Leone case, right? Just, this
Yeah,
new sort of family, quote unquote, family that she's made.
right.
Now you have a whole new fulfilling sort of phase to life that you can experience with other people.
Yeah. Alright, I wanna have a little fun now.
Okay.
I wanna ask you and me and our listeners, where might your roots take you if you were to do an ancestry trip today?
Yes, right. So for myself personally, and this is something that I do want to do, and I haven't done it yet, and I kick myself a bit at now, having worked on these stories, and not interviewing enough living relatives while they were living. I wish I had done more of
Mm,
that. And so anybody younger who's listening to this,
I
you
know,
know,
right?
do that while you can, because,
Absolutely.
you may miss that opportunity. But um certainly, I would like to go to Ireland at some point. That's my family history. Uh, you know, I have not done all this research yet. I would like to do it, but to my understanding, it's the kind of typical American immigrant story. The whole Ellis Island and all of that, and um, I don't think it would be. I don't think it'd be terribly difficult to create that family tree that I'm talking about. Find those roots, and then travel there and experience. My understanding is it's County Cork, so at least I have that.
Oh,
I know.
okay.
So
Oh,
yeah,
well, and like you said, Jim, you're just now getting close to that phase where you might have time to do that kind of research, right? So your kids are still just leaving the house.
that's
So
right. That's right.
it takes a yeah. Um, I think for me, I've heard a lot of family stories and some of it is probably mythology. So I would like to know how much of it is real. But I would my family on my mother's side is from Latvia, and on my father's side is from Poland,
Hmm.
and so it would be interesting, I think, to explore that a little bit. I don't know where, I don't know if there's still family there, but, I think that would be fun. I would love to find a cousin to go with, wouldn't that be cool to go with another
Absolutely.
family member? Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, you never know. You may find that person.
I may find that person, right? So, and all of you listening, I would love to know. So share with us in your comments or, after the show, whatever, let us know where you're going to go. Jim has a place where we can go and get more information about what AARP is doing around travel. So you can go to aarp.org/travel, and they have an abundance of resources there and more of the stories like Jim was sharing with us of people that have done these kinds of trips, as well as how to travel safely and, how to pack, all those things
Yes.
that are helpful. So check out aarp.org/travel. Jim, any last words that you want to leave us with?
Well, I think that just travel in general, I'll just say this. One other thing we've learned is no matter what you do, it's all good, right? So don't just, although we're talking about one particular type of trip or vacation, do what's right for you. The world is huge. It's big. There's so much to discover, and don't, let other people determine where you go and what you do. Find what works for you. Find what's important to you, and go out and do it.
Go
right?
and do it,
Yeah,
right? That's great. That's great advice. Don't wait. Don't put it off, because you never know what's going to happen next.
exactly.
If you'd like to join our Facebook group, it's a private group. You can go to facebook.com/groups/boomer banter, and you could tell us about your travel trips there. That would be fun. And it inspires other people that are in that group looking for connection. And then, as I said, go to the website, heyboomer.biz, and click on Age Well with Us, so that you can subscribe to the newsletter and find out about all the great stuff that's happening in the Boomer Banter community. And please share this with friends, family members, right? So you get them inspired to start talking about ancestry travel. Okay, I want to recommend, do I have that one here? I don't have that up yet. We'll talk about that next week. But I want to tell you who is my guest next week. And it's a bit unusual. Okay, so this is July 14th. I'm going to combine purpose and your smartphone. Okay, I was skeptical when I heard this too. But here's the story. Anne Goldberg, who will be my guest, was searching for work that would be fulfilling and give her life meaning. And she realized that she was good at helping older adults with their technology. So now she focuses exclusively on phones, both iPhones and Androids. And she even has a book coming out. So we're going to learn about how she found her purpose through work in her later years, and pick up some tips on using your phone safely, avoiding scams. And Jim, this has been so much fun.
Oh,
thank you so
it's
much.
been great.
Yeah, this has been great. Now I'm looking forward to when we're going to take our trips.
Exactly.
I'll see your story in the magazine one day.
That's
bet.
right. Absolutely, for sure.
Awesome. Thank you so much. My name is Wendy Green with Jim Lenahan, and thanks for joining us. And hopefully I'll see you next week. Bye.